Thank you for all of your blessings that you continue to bestow upon us. We pray, God, now for wisdom and knowledge and understanding, that you will guide us and that you will help us and that you will sustain us, Lord. Strengthen us where we are weak, God. Give us all that we need, Lord, in order to continue this journey to be better disciples for you. In Christ's name, amen. So this afternoon, I am talking about clergy wellness and the need for sabbatical. 4 years ago, I was honored to serve as one of 2 lecturers at the 104th Annual Hamptons Ministers Conference. And one of my lectures was titled, Preaching with a Limp. At the last minute, with much hesitation, I decided to be extremely transparent about a past experience. I began the lecture reading a letter I had wrote and had not read for probably 12 or 14 years. And I pulled it out on that day and decided to read it. I've been asked to revisit the letter again, as well as talk about the importance of a sabbatical. If you have or have not heard the letter I wrote, I want to begin in the same manner I did 4 years ago. So listen to this both candid and transparent letter written by a pastor. Today I have vowed to be as honest and candid as possible. My recent physical and emotional problems have taken their toll on me. However, beyond the constant headaches I have been experiencing for several months and the pain in my back that has returned since my surgical procedure, I am now burnt out, stressed, depressed, and at the point in my ministry where I feel I cannot go any further. I have faithfully served this church for 18 years, and during this time I've earned numerous academic degrees which I've completed without taking any time off in between earning each of these degrees. This will be my first year since I've been your pastor that I have not been enrolled in school. I have led us in constructing a new building, developing and hiring staff, brought public recognition to our church, led us into purchasing a city block and 2 capital campaigns. I preach 3 times each Sunday and do so much more. Within the last 5 years, I've buried and preached the funerals of my dear godmother, 2 uncles and 1 aunt, of whom I was very close to, my young niece, my brother-in-law, my mother-in-law, and lastly, my dear father. In all of this, I have now hit a wall. And unfortunately, I am at a place now where I no longer want to do ministry, and more specifically, pastor. A few months ago, I left our church after a meeting and I was drained. While driving home on the expressway, I began to approach my exit. However, just before exiting, I thought I was about to have a heart attack or stroke as I could not breathe. I felt tightness in my chest. I immediately pulled over, stopped my car, and begged God not to let me die like this. And I began to take slow and deep breaths. After a few minutes, I realized I was not having a heart attack or stroke, but rather an anxiety attack. Like everything else, I got past it. Thank God for sparing my life, moved on, and without telling anyone my experience, was back at church in order to preach on Sunday. I believe what is happening now is what I've been afraid of for quite some time. And that is, I've been afraid to slow down and rest because I thought, felt, and believed that if I slowed down, I would die. I've been running at the maximum speed of adrenaline, which is why I have been able to continue to do ministry without anyone, including myself, recognizing that I was going to crash. It is said that when a pastor draws close to 10 to 20 years in the same ministry setting and leading a growing church, they need to take a long and serious break, or serotonin levels will otherwise become depleted. This became an eye-opener to me as I began to read the book, Leading on Empty. I learned that serotonin is a neurochemical like endorphins, dopamine, and oxytocin. It's a natural feel-good hormone. Serotonin influences most brain cells, both directly and indirectly, and impact levels of mood, anxiety, cognition, memory, and perception. It replenishes during times of rest and then fuels you while you're working. If, however, one continues to drive on without replenishing, his or her serotonin will be depleted. As a substitute, one's body will be forced to replace the serotonin with adrenaline, which I have done. But to run on adrenaline, however, is to destroy one's system, and one, like myself, will burn out sooner on the inside than they are able to see on the outside. Needless to say, chronic depression eventually takes over. There are times I'm in so much emotional pain and consumed with depression that I don't want to get out of bed and I dread morning coming. I have given so much of myself to help others, listening to them, and unknowingly at times carrying their burdens while still trying to live, balance, and enjoy my own life. I did this well for years, but admittedly it has caught up with me. As I sat at my desk at home a few days ago, I burst into tears, crying uncontrollably because I knew the place I was in and I could not see myself going forward in life. Depression had darkened my door to the point of suicidal thoughts. And sadly to say, the only thing that kept me from taking my own life was not only being convinced somewhere in the depths of my soul that such thought was a trick of the enemy, but more importantly, I wasn't sure if my wife and children would be able to make claim on my life insurance and be taken care of like they deserved if I committed suicide. Furthermore, I was at the point that if I knew my family would be financially stable, I was planning to resign from this pastorate last Sunday, walking away without any regret. People have no idea how demanding the pastorate can be and how demanding people can be because everyone thinks they're the only one. Always being on call, the betrayal we experience by those on our ministerial staff, the pressure to feel the need to do better from one Sunday sermon to the next, the administrative workload, the pulling from one person to the next, and by way of outreach, there are non-members who call or show up at church wanting their needs met. This over time takes a toll, and as a much younger pastor, some of these things made me feel like many of us want to feel, needed and valued, but now I feel imprisoned. I have set the bar high not only at this church but in other areas of my life, and amid the grind to do things well, I, however, have not undertaken proper rest and time away. The end result has not only caught up with me physically, it has caught up with me spiritually and emotionally. This year I celebrated having the longest tenure as pastor of any pastor at this church, including its founder, and I rejoice greatly in this fact. None of the previous pastors preached or led this church as long as I have, or accomplished what I've accomplished, and the one that came close, our founder, died of a heart attack in what I believe was his early 50s. I'm sorry that it has come to this, but I am glad that I'm beginning to come to terms with where I am physically, spiritually, and emotionally. I am burnt out, and I'm experiencing serious episodes of depression. It hurts and it's painful to acknowledge that I feel lost at this point, but I have nothing to give. I don't want to do what I'm doing anymore. The question I'm left with is, what am I going to do in this right now moment? The answer is, I don't know. My initial thought was to resign, leave everything, and just float, waiting for the next thing to do, but deep down I know God has me at this church for some reason. There's a very small part of me that believes God is not finished with me yet. I'm still coming to grips with where I am and how I physically and emotionally am, yet I'm still praying when I can and have strength to, and I'm thinking everything through. Sincerely, God's servant and possibly your former pastor. I wrote that letter in April of 2010 when I was at my former church. I was extremely drained, exhausted, and later diagnosed as chemically depressed and eventually prescribed Wellbutrin, which I remain on today. There were numerous times I laid in bed crying, consumed with depression, and in a fetal position with my wife and my children crying at the side of my bed, begging me to get out of bed and live. I emailed this letter I read to you to the chairpersons of both deacons and trustee ministry of my former church and a trusted friend who was a member of the church at the time. These were individuals of whom I had assurance of their confidentiality. However, before this letter was emailed to them on that Sunday, I preached 3 services, and I continued to preach the next 4 to 6 Sundays, and I was preaching in silent pain, and I was preaching with a limp. It's a dark place for me to go. And every time I think about it, I get emotionally overwhelmed, so excuse me for a second. Here is a recent list. You can go to the next slide if you put the slide, the next one. Here is a recent list that itemizes the life and the perils of the pastor. This is found in the 2022, this year. 23% of pastors have been fired or pressured to resign at least once in their careers. 70% of pastors constantly fight depression, and 50% of pastors feel so discouraged that they would leave the ministry if they could, but have no other way of making a living. 70% don't have any close friends. 75% report severe stress causing anguish, worry, bewilderment, anger, depression, fear, and alienation. 80% say they have insufficient time with their spouse. 80% believe that pastoral ministry affects their families negatively. 90% work more than 50 hours a week, and 1,500 pastors leave the ministry each month due to burnout, conflict, and moral failure. Next slide. Recent data indicate that U.S. pastors are currently in crisis and at a risk of burnout. In recent poll of a U.S. pastor, the faith-based research company Barna Group found that 38% have considered quitting full-time ministry in 2021. Why? Burnout is a major reason. Next slide. The above list was compiled by Sean Nemsick. If you answered yes to all three of these questions, you are probably burnt out. Are you emotionally fatigued, not just a little tired, but deep exhaustion that goes all the way to your bones? A few days off will not cure this fatigue. Do you have a diminished sense of accomplishment? You may be doing the same work, but everything feels harder, and you just aren't getting the results you used to. Work that used to bring you joy now drains your soul. Have you lost your sense of self? You have forgotten what you enjoy, what you value, or why you do your work. You just don't recognize the person in the mirror. Are you feeling hopeless? You lost your optimism. You don't see how change is possible. You feel stuck, maybe forever. Not feeling motivated, being tired all the time, negative attitudes, lashing out at church members, family or staff, not caring about the job anymore, arriving late or avoiding appointments, irritability, feeling hopeless, addictive behaviors, conflict in relationships. Those are just a few indicators. Burnout looks different for each person, but in general, those are some of the signs to look for. Next slide. Simply put, the signs are stress, depression, insufficient sleep and rest, spiritual dryness, loss of motivation for ministry, feeling of isolation, susceptibility to temptation, disengaged, and lack of love for those who you serve. And now in 2022, it is worse now than it's ever been. Most of us are pastoring a church we have never seen before. It's a different way of doing ministry. And there's more pressure on us now as pastors and leaders than there has ever been before. Now we're not pastoring if we have one church, we are pastoring two churches, one that is in person and one that is online. And if we're not careful, we will burn out. Here's the truth of the matter. Many of us have not even recovered from the pandemic. We have not taken the proper time, and we feel like we don't have the time to take the time because the church is in transition. But while the church is in transition and we're trying to help it survive, we are killing ourselves. Go to the next slide. But in order to preach and pastor on full and hopefully without a limp requires a degree of personal stamina, a sense of vision, mutual understanding between pastor and people, periods of rest, as well as regular times for personal growth. And to accomplish these things, pastors need time to step away from the pulpit and the pastorate for an extended period of time to be renewed. And this time is referred to as clergy renewal, or more familiar term is sabbatical. What is a sabbatical? Next slide. A pastor sabbatical is a time designated for the pastor to remove himself or herself from the routines of regular ministry and to experience a change in perspective, to receive spiritual nourishment, and to deepen one's relationship with God. And the intent of the sabbatical is for pastors to return to their congregation refreshed and renewed and ready to move forward to the next phase of their life together. So why don't pastors take sabbaticals? Well, most of our leaders can't even spell sabbatical, our people. Or the church has never even heard of a pastor taking a sabbatical. I've been at my church my church has been in existence 126 years. I've been there 10 years now, and I was the first pastor to take a sabbatical. My first sabbatical came at my former church, but it was a forced sabbatical because I had already burnt myself out, and you cannot enjoy a sabbatical already burnt out. You have to plan and prepare for it before burnout happens. So I was burnt out. Took 6 months of a sabbatical and got to the point that it didn't matter to me what happened. I needed to take care of myself. And let me help you out here. A sabbatical and time by yourself is not a month off in August at conventions. That is not even your vacation, even though we use it as our vacation. To get away is to get away from everything and everyone, and even, God forgive me if you think I'm being blasphemous, even ministry. Second, the church feels it cannot financially support or sustain the pastor taking a sabbatical. Third, the pastors don't feel they can take a lengthy amount of time away from the church. Can I help you? The church will still be there when you get back. Next, pastors often don't think they need time off, at least not right now. They feel they just need to preach and pastor through this personal season in their life. And here's where I'm guilty. I used to think if I could just make it to the pulpit, I'll be all right. But it's what happens after I have preached and have pastored the people that matters. And the sad thing is that a lot of us have risked our families to save the church rather than our families and our own lives. Afraid people will leave the church or not attend during the pastor's sabbatical. These are things we have to get over in order to take care of ourselves. Afraid giving will go down. Afraid the pastor will not return or leave the church when they return. Now let me tell you, that's real. Because while on sabbatical, I found out there's another life out there besides the pastorate. And it is difficult, honestly, to come back after you realize there's a life outside of the pulpit. There was something, I didn't know anything about brunch on Sunday until I took my sabbatical. And you realize that there are so much that you have missed in life. So here's the thing. Lilly Endowment offers you a clergy renewal grant, which I'll talk about and that I received. But when you sign for the grant, if you get the grant, you have to sign to remain at your church at least 2 years after you receive the grant. And the reason, again, is most pastors resign after their sabbatical because they found out there's something more in life. Afraid the church will be in disarray when they return. So here's what happened to me. Took my sabbatical the first time. It was a forced sabbatical. Put my associate pastor in charge, and he tried to take the church while I was on sabbatical. Got up, started preaching about you don't serve a man, and you don't do this, and you got to be careful about this and that. And everything he was talking about was, I wasn't named, but the church knew he was talking about me. So I'm on sabbatical. My chair of deacons calls me, and he says, Pastor, you need to look at this CD. You're not going to believe it, because when I first found it out, I called him, I had lunch with him, and I said, hey, man, what's going on? He said, oh, nothing. You know how people are. They talk, and they're this and that, and la, 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 la. And I said, here's what you do. When you get up to preach, all you need to do is preach Jesus and him crucified. You don't need to preach about anybody else or what the members. The other thing was he was upset because when he preached, there was not the church was not as full as when I preach, and so he's fussing at the folk that's there when he should be talking about the folk that's not, talking to the folk that's not there. And so now the sheep are hungry because he's trying to holler at the goats. And when you preach the goats, your sheep become malnutrition. And they don't show up at church meeting, only the goats do. And so he started doing all that. I talked to him and said, hey, this is what you do. You know, he uses a manuscript. I said, stick to your manuscript. Don't leave your manuscript. So next Sunday he gets up, he begins to preach, and he takes his manuscript at the end of the sermon, near the end of the sermon, and he throws it and says, I'm going to preach the hell what I want to preach. I'm not going to preach what somebody tells me to preach. I'm going to preach what I want to preach. And he goes back into trying to destroy me. This is why we're afraid to take sabbatical. Because there are people we think we can trust, but we got to keep our eye on them. Got back, had to come off my sabbatical, had to fire him. And then when I fire him, now I got to deal with members who love him and think I should give him another chance. And let me tell you, people are more connected and committed to their friends than to the ministry and the success of the ministry. I've watched musicians and pastors do things that they need to be fired for, but the choir's now mad at the pastor, want to get rid of the pastor and bring the musician back. Or get rid of the pastor and bring the assistant pastor back, because you got people like Absalom who are whispering in Absalom's ear saying, if you were the pastor. And they take that and they run with it. Afraid the church will be in disarray. My church was in disarray. But I went back on sabbatical because I had already trained some people on what to do in a situation like this. So go to the next slide. So why churches should offer their pastor a sabbatical. The first is the care and protection of the pastor's mental health is a big priority. A pastor must deal with emotional and spiritual dynamics plus long hours that few people understand. There are folk who will never understand what you do as a leader and the toll that it takes on you. I was embarrassed that I was suffering from depression, and I didn't want anybody to know. My wife is a family physician, and she told me the only way you're really going to be able to deal with this is to be honest about it. But I came from and grew up in the household, you just pray and have faith and God will make a way out of no way. But I was suffering on the inside because depression is not just what people do to you. There is a chemical imbalance that may take medication, and there's nothing wrong with taking your medication for your depression. I came off by myself, not thinking it would affect me, and I saw the effects of me not, because what happens is you start feeling good and you think you don't need this anymore, and you realize you need it. Second, extend the tenure of the pastor. A pastor is like a car engine. If you take good care of it, it will last far longer. If you want to have a great long-term leadership from an emotionally stable and spiritual strong pastor, a sabbatical is one of the best ways to do it. The church body has a responsibility to care for their pastor's mental, spiritual, and physical needs. Third, a sabbatical help create new ideals for building momentum behind the church's mission. Without time to think and reflect, the pastor is caught up in the week-to-week of ministry demands. They must have time to read, reflect, and think for extended period of times. And this is the way to create momentum and energy for the future. Because when I was burnt out, I was pastoring on fumes. And my gift and my skills and my talents, because I knew how to put a sermon together. I knew how to incorporate the black church tradition to get some call and response. I knew how to do all of that, but I was doing it on fumes. And a lot of us can do it well with a mask on. But at some point, that mask has to come off. Next, number 4, it helps rejuvenate the pastor. marriage and family, which often suffers in ministry. Being a pastor requires a huge amount of time and emotional energy. And if a pastor does not carefully guard this aspect of their life, their family will suffer. And please understand, you are not the only one suffering when you are dealing with depression and when you are burnt out. Your family suffers as well. 5, the pastor can have uninterrupted study time. The daily demands on the pastor time make deep study very difficult. A sabbatical gives a pastor the time and space to do deep study that informs their theology and fuels their message for the coming months and years. Had I not taken my sabbatical, I would not have been able to last the next 2 years of my ministry. 2 years later, 3 years later, I did get called to another church because I had done everything I could do at that church, which is why I was burnt out, and it was no longer a healthy place for me. Hear me. You have to know when your church is no longer a healthy place for you. It was killing me. And the people I was serving, I could not serve the way I served when I was in my 20s. I came there at 26 years old. At around 40, 48, it was time to go. And you have to know when a place is no longer healthy for you and your family. Because 2 years before I left, my wife had already packed her bags, and I kept stumbling over her suitcases, but I didn't know what they were. They were already at the door. They were invisible. They were already at the door, and I was tripping every time because she had already packed up. And when I was on sabbatical, I was walking, I remember in the park with her, and I said, you know what? I think God is telling me it's time to move on. She said, it's about time. And I asked her, I said, baby, why didn't you tell me 2 years ago? She said, because that's not my job or position. God has to reveal to you when it's time. But she said, I packed up 2 years ago. That's a hard thing. Number 6, it gives staff and key volunteers opportunities to lead and gain experience. One of the best ways to boost leadership capacity of staff and volunteers is to give them a chance to actually lead. It wasn't until I took my sabbatical that my chairman, my deacons, my trustees said, God, Pastor, I didn't know you had to do all of this. We saw you doing it. We could see you doing it, but we didn't know how much emotionally and physically, emotional and physical toll it took on you. But we had to be in some part of that leadership, and you allow us to do some things for us to see we need to give our pastor a sabbatical. Number 7, the emotional toll ministry takes on pastor. The pastor wears many hats, no doubt. Counselor, teacher, leader, fundraiser, vision caster, chief administrator, chief executive officer, and more. And the emotional toll of the position is a huge burden to bear and is unlike any other job. Number 8, next slide. A sabbatical is a biblical concept. You are not, I know we hear of it in the academic world, but it started with God, who worked 6 days and on the 7th day rested. It did not start in the academic world. It started with God. It's a biblical precedent, shows us that after 6 years of work, the 7th year is designated as one of rest. Number 9, a sabbatical allows the pastor time to address specific challenge in their life or ministry. There are circumstances in the church or personal life of the pastor that warrant extended time away. Number 10, a sabbatical allows for mental health recovery and strengthening not available by other means. If you ask any person who has had a heart transplant when they might be running a race, they'll tell you not anytime soon. Then the same is true for any pastor who has been doing ministry for at least a few years. They have been through a lot, and it takes for them to recover and rest. There is no other way to do this other than a sabbatical. And lastly, it is an invitation to establish healthy patterns for the future. That a sabbatical establishes a much better pathway forward that allows leaders to take time to rest and be refreshed, but it doesn't happen by accident. It must be intentional, and it could be a time to confront our own dark side and combat a temptation we are dealing with. Because you do remember you are human. Go to the next slide. So, when I came to the church I'm at now, been there 10 years as of this past September, they had never heard of a pastor taking a sabbatical. And so I had to talk to them about it, the importance of it. I selected a few leaders or leadership who I explained what a sabbatical is, and I did it not to convince, but to educate. I could not go in there convincing them I need a sabbatical. I had to educate them on what a pastor sabbatical is and why it is necessary and why every pastor should have one. I placed in my contract that every 5 to 7 years I take 3 months sabbatical with pay and a stipend from the church. So the first time I did it, my church gave me a stipend as well as continued to pay me. When I did it the second time at my new church, I applied for the Lilly Endowment Grant, didn't get it the first time, and then I applied again and got it in my 6th year. And when you apply for the Clergy Renewal Grant, they give you $50,000. $35,000 for you, $15,000 for the church to cover the cost. And when I looked at the list of people who had received the grant, they were all white. Presbyterian, United Methodist, Episcopalian, maybe 2 or 3 Baptists, and they were white, but no African Americans. And so I called Lily, I went to a conference for them, and I asked them why we weren't on there, and they said, black pastors, very few black pastors apply. And when they do apply, they do not consult others to help them with their application, and they failed to get the grant. I took that $35,000. Me and my wife went to Australia. We went to New Zealand. We took our adult children and their significant others with us to Martha's Vineyard for a week. It was the best 3 months of my life. And here's how you plan it. I have on here in parentheses 4 months. 2 months before I'm supposed to leave, I do not preach. I am there, but I do not preach. I am preparing the people for me to leave. Then when I come back on the 2nd Sunday in September, I don't preach the first 2 Sundays because now I have to get back in my homiletical groove and get back in the rotation of things and the groove of things, and they have to be used to me coming back. You don't just jump out and you don't just jump in. Those 3 months, I took time to study. Many of you may have the book I wrote, A History of the Black Baptist Church. I wrote that book while on sabbatical. It took me 3 weeks because I had the time. I didn't worry about anything. And here's the thing, you have to, and this is on here, you have to prepare people for your sabbatical. So I put together a pastor sabbatical committee together a year prior to my sabbatical because you have to plan. You have to have people who will speak on your behalf because there will be, it wasn't that easy. There were people who were saying, I don't get a sabbatical at my job, why should the pastor? What does he need a sabbatical for? What are we going to do the 3 months he's away? The offering's going to go down. People are not going to attend. And you have to be able to educate your members or those in your leadership to answer those questions for you. It's a battle you should not fight by yourself. Provide the church with a brochure detailing answers to questions that may arise. So every question I thought they may have, I answered it with my leadership and gave them the brochure so they saw, who's going to handle Bible study? What's the rotation? And I let them see the rotation. Because, oftentimes, you can't let folk know who's preaching because when they know who's preaching, they decide whether they'll come or not. But because I was honest with them, they were supportive. Had I hid it from them, it would have been a different story. I was honest about who was teaching Bible study. I was honest about who was preaching. I was honest about everything that was going to happen, and that's what it takes. Arrange for who will cover your responsibilities while you are gone. And again, apply for a clergy renewal grant and celebrate leaving. So before I left, the last Sunday before I left, we had a reception for me leaving, and Senator Raphael Warnock preached for us. I didn't preach again, and we celebrated, and then when I returned, I preached again. Now, I had to make sure that at least one Sunday, they knew they were going to get a word from a pastor, because sometimes, you know, the associate ministers, they want to hear someone else. I had the Reverend Dr. Frank Thomas preach every first Sunday while I was on sabbatical. So all of this planning, putting together a committee, is very important. Celebrate your leaving, celebrate your return. Without my sabbatical or break, I don't think I would have lasted where I was 20 years, and I sure would not have lasted where I am 10 years. So coming this summer, my 10th year, going into my 11th year, I get another 3-month sabbatical. I don't get the grant, but what we did was, when I came off my last sabbatical, every year we put something away so that the church would give me and my family to go on sabbatical with. So now I get $10,000 from the church that we put away, that we saved for just for me and my family, but I still get my regular pay. This is planning. But you got to educate your people. Don't think that will never happen at my church. They will never allow me to do it. You never know unless you ask. Next slide. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Not a question, Dr. Croft, but just a word of confirmation. When you came 3 years ago to Hickory, I was sharing with you during that mid-year session that I had planned a sabbatical after my 10th year. It was only a month from a smaller church, but I went on that sabbatical. My people enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. Praise God. And now that I'm close to at the 15-year mark, we plan to do another one.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for that, and I appreciate your help. So even small churches can do it if it's planned correctly and you do it right. Doesn't have to be 3 months, but a month did my heart well.
Listen, and I feel as though that's my ministry now for particularly Black Baptist pastors, to encourage them to take a sabbatical. Any other questions? There got to be another question. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'll make it available. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, sir.
How do you encourage pastors in their church to remain as their church remains back? Because I noticed you talked about how some pastors fear that their church will not be theirs with GBSC back. Why they take a sabbatical? How would you encourage them and maintain that?
The thing was before, and I'm going to use my present church because this was new for them and it wasn't a forced sabbatical. The thing was, I had to prepare my leadership, and we had to meet consistently to talk about their responsibilities and what is required of them. They had to understand why I needed the sabbatical. They would speak on my behalf. So this wasn't a thing of, you know, you have power now, you have control now. This is about the ministry of the church. The other thing is, while I was on sabbatical, I gave my church the book by Richard Foster, Spiritual Disciplines. So while I was on sabbatical, their responsibility every Wednesday was to gather and read and talk about that book. Because while I'm on sabbatical and trying to grow, my themes was living, learning, and loving. When you go for your grant, they ask you, you know, what's your theme, the theme of your sabbatical? Mine was living, learning, loving. And my learning part was discipling myself and growing in the Word as a Christian, and not looking at the Bible to find a sermon, but looking at it to grow just as my members grow. And they were doing the same. So now the Spirit of God for me was in control at the church. The deacons, the trustees understood their responsibility. The associate ministers understood their responsibility. It's all preparation. And I explained to them what I believe the church should look like when I return. The leadership should be stronger. We should have a better relationship as us being away from each other. When we come back together, we ought to be stronger together. And that I will set forth a new vision for where I see God taking this church. So all of that was planning, which made them excited about when pastor's going to come back, because he's going to be refreshed, he's going to be renewed, it's going to be fresh ideas, you know. But it starts with your leadership. They have to speak on your behalf, and that'll keep the church from getting out of control. Every 5 to 7 years. You can apply again. Normally, when you get it the first time, you might want to wait because they want to make sure everybody get a chance. So my next sabbatical, which will come in my 15th year, I'll apply again.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. They didn't tell me who passed, who died, who was sick. No one called me. No one emailed me. That was the agreement. That was hard coming back because I had a good deacon who passed away. And again, this is how you prepare your leadership. The leadership explained to the family why I needed a sabbatical, what a sabbatical was, and that as a part of the agreement, I cannot preach anywhere, I cannot teach anywhere, I cannot come back and do funerals. It's a hard thing. So I had to come back and learn who passed away while I was gone. And I was not going to come back no matter who it was. Because you got to take care of yourself. And people will drive you to an early grave and go on with their life while your life has become shambles and a mess. So every first Sunday, my chairman would get up and would talk about my sabbatical, or somebody from the committee would talk about my sabbatical to keep it in front of the church. It wasn't a hidden thing. And I'll be honest with you, there were times I was sitting there and I felt uncomfortable, you know, because I know there were people thinking like, you know, why are you getting 3 months off? Now, my first church was 6 months. But this, you know, I try to stay with 3 months. But I felt uncomfortable at times. But I had to get used to the fact that I deserve this. I work hard. I put in the time. I won the trust and the love of the people. I deserve this. So yeah, nobody, no contact, no funerals, no preaching out, no teaching, just enjoying life and learning how to cook. Oh, she's going to give you the mic.
You shared with us what you've gone through, but in speaking with other pastors, especially black pastors, do you get a feeling that they believe that going through this is like the wounds of the profession? You know, like the certain wounds, certain injuries you're going to get in football. Mm-hmm. Do you find that they feel that way about ministry and pastoring?
Yeah.
Maybe that's why they push back from sabbaticals?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of reasons, and some I've already shared. But if that's a reason, that's why you need to take a sabbatical. I don't think it's a great time to take one, but you're forced to take one. I wish I had planned my first one. Again, it was by force. I was just depressed. I was just in a dark place in my life and didn't understand why. And then when what happened with my assistant pastor, that just deepened the wound and the hurt because you love someone and you hate to fire anybody that you love because they have a livelihood, they have a family. So I had to deal with that pain, which is why I extended it from being a 3-month sabbatical to being a 6-month sabbatical, because I was going to get my healthy 3 months. Somebody else had a hand up.
Yes, when it comes to also the mental health of pastors, how would you encourage that? And part B with that, how would you encourage a church to be a more healthy church?
Yeah.
Because I've dealt a lot in church health, and a lot of time isn't taken to look at the individual's health in the congregations, and some feel they have to do it in order for things to happen or whatever. Just want to speak to the healthy mindset and psychology of pastors, as well as having healthy churches.
The first thing is you have to be honest with yourself about where you are, and then you need to find yourself a therapist. That was another difficult step for me. I remember the first time I went to my therapist, I cried the whole time because I just, couldn't believe I was in this place and in this position. But I found the therapist, and that helped a lot. But then I started doing Bible studies on mental health, because I know that there were people in my church who were suffering from it, and I did sermons on it, as well, that really opened the door for us to talk about it. So preaching about it, teaching about it, helping understand, letting people understand, but being transparent yourself helps. Be honest about where you are. I didn't want to tell anybody I don't want to do this anymore. I want to quit. Because I was watching my friends and they were doing so well. They were probably suffering as well, but covering up. But I didn't want to do that. But when I did it, I was set free. And so now, even today, when I'm dealing with depression, again, because of the chemical imbalance, I know that I need to stay in bed, or I need to go get some butter pecan ice cream and enjoy myself and do what I need to do that makes me happy. That's my thing, butter pecan ice cream. And if you see me with butter pecan ice cream, you say, oh, he's dealing with depression. Yes.
Prior to getting to the point where you were, how does one know or recognize the signs of needing the sabbatical?
Yeah. I was very irritable. Writing sermons, even praying or reading the Bible was a drudgery for me. I didn't enjoy it as much. I was always tired. And so there were certain signs that told me I'm heading towards burnout. So right now, my minister of music was like, you didn't tell me this. I was telling him, I said, I'm planning to take 2 weeks off in November, the 2nd and the 3rd Sunday, because 4th Sunday is Advent and want to be there for Advent, but I can feel it. So I take a couple of weeks, even though I'm getting my sabbatical in June of next year. I'm not going to wait till June. You got to know the signs. So I don't need a long period of time, but I know I need 2 weeks off. I've gotten past of worrying about the church and started worrying about myself, because I don't want to do this forever. But when I stop doing it, I still want to have a healthy body and a healthy mind to enjoy what comes after this. Because a lot of us, my models were they retired when they were too sick to preach, or they died in the pulpit. And they never saw anything outside of the church. And I just, not only can I not do that to myself, I love my wife too much to do that to her. She deserves better. So now I've been pastoring now for 30 years, and I've been married 30 years. I met her my first year of my pastorate at my former church. She was already a member there, and I wasn't going to leave without her, so I married her. But she's been going through this 30 years. And I have to remember that it's not just me going through it. My children went through it. She went through it. So I owe her at least a good, hopefully 20 or more years outside of the pastorate. I owe that to her because she's been faithful. Yeah. 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 So my first church was in the hood of Philadelphia. It was not an educated crowd. Very few went to college. The church went from 177 members when I got there to about 1,900. But out of that 1,900, maybe 10 went to college. That was the makeup of the church. They had never heard, of course, of a pastor taking a sabbatical, just like my present church. But I had to educate them on it, and I had to be able to articulate my pain and my hurt. And if you want me to be here, I have to do this. I must do this for myself and for my family. So it's really just being transparent and clear. And then, what am I going to do while I'm on sabbatical? You know, am I just getting up late every morning? No, I'm spending time with God. I'm getting new vision for what God wants to do that I would not be able to do if I continue on the way I'm going.
Yes, sir. I'll be celebrating my 40th year pastor's anniversary coming up in November.
Bless you.
The question I want to ask you, did Jesus tell you to stay that long away from your congregation? Or did you decide to do that?
Jesus told me.
And the next question.
And my body told me.
Okay. I'm just thinking about that. I don't remember Jesus taking that long away from his disciples.
Well, here's the thing. I'm not as equipped as Jesus. I won't say he's a little stronger than me. He's a whole lot stronger than I am. And a part of him, well, 100% of him is God as well.
Okay, thank you, sir. The next question is, what is the statistics of pastors that take a sabbatical like you take?
Very low in the Black Baptist tradition. Very low. You know, I'm sorry? Yeah. Yeah.
How much time did your family spend with you, and how much time was just you alone?
Yeah. So one of the things I did, I took a week off. I went to Yale and began to write the book that I'm talking about, and took a continual education class there. There was a week that I spent up in Princeton, New Jersey. I went to Princeton Theological Seminary, and so I enjoyed that area that I was able to go to by myself and just enjoy myself. So probably out of those 3 months, probably 2 weeks. By just me. But for 10 days, we were in Australia, and then for about 7 days, me and my wife were in New Zealand. And then the children and us spent the whole week together in Martha's Vineyard. I can't cook, so I took cooking up and trying to learn how to cook. When my wife cooked, my children say soul food. When I cook, they say manna. What is it?
Yes, sir. My name is Reverend Timothy Edwards, and I've been pastoring about 42 years.
Bless you.
Now, you said that you have written a book on this. Okay.
On the history of the Black Baptist Church.
on the history of the Black Baptist Church, okay, but you hadn't written a book on how to take a sabbatical.
Yeah, it's in me. I just got to get it out.
Oh, okay. And my reason for asking is that I'm getting burned out just trying to figure out how to go to them to talk to them about a sabbatical.
So, I hear you. I hear you.
So how can you help me in that area that I don't lose it trying to get it?
The first thing is you got to believe yourself that you deserve it.
Okay.
In 42 years, you deserve it.
You got it.
And you have to not convince, educate them on why you deserve it. And then get a few of your trusted leaders and explain to them why you deserve it and let them speak on your behalf. When you speak, then let them speak. Pastor needs this. We are supporting Pastor for the sabbatical. You know, the church has grown. The church has done this. La 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 la. You know, he or she deserves this. You shouldn't be the only one speaking up for a sabbatical. And it may start out maybe not 3 months, maybe 2 months, and then try to get to 3 months. Yeah. Okay. There's a slide. Can you go to the next? There's a slide. It's right after that one. Yes. No. So maybe I missed it. Go back. So there's a slide with 3 books that I recommend. You see it? No? So there's a book by Wayne Cordeiro, Cordiero, I believe. It's called Living on Empty. That's one. The second is by, and I just remember the last name, Bullock. It's called Planning a Sabbatical, Clergy Renewal. And the third one, last name is Sailors, Sailers. And it's the same thing around clergy renewal. His name is Robert. I'm surprised. I had 3 books up there, and it had a slide with it. It said resources. But those are the 3 books that I would recommend. The one, Clergy Renewal, Planning Your Sabbatical, will guide you. It'll be very helpful to you. It will guide you on how to talk to your congregation and plan your sabbatical. Yeah. Living on Empty is a great story about a pastor who dealt with burnout and had to go on sabbatical for the first time. Yes. She's one.
I believe it's good what you're teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I listen at your teaching, the scripture comes to me that we're supposed to look after the temple.
Yes.
And we are the living temple.
Yes.
Paul says, take care of the temple.
Yes.
Then he asked us what? Not to be ignorant.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not going to be ignorant today, even though we might not take 3 months at one time. But I take heed of what you're saying to learn to take care of my temple a little bit better.
Yeah.
In the way that God worked me. I've been pastoring for 24 years. But at the same time, we have come a long ways. When I first went there, they didn't know what paid vacation was.
Yeah.
But now I'm getting paid vacation, Social Security. But I'm just saying how God take us from one level to the next, but we can't do it all overnight.
That's right.
And seeing what you presenting to us, we have to take it back, but we can't jump to 3 months. Might start off with a month to get to 3 months.
Yeah.
But I take your advice but let us not be weary of what's been brought to us today.
Yeah.
Let us take it and take it back and benefit from it.
Yeah.
What we get in Christ Jesus, in the name of Jesus, we have what? We have benefits.
Mm-hmm.
What you're doing, you're breaking down benefits of how to take care of the temple. If we don't take care of the temple, we ain't going to have no church.
That's right.
The Holy Ghost.
Thank you. Yes.
I have been an assistant pastor with my husband at a church, and finally have a church of my own, a pastor. During the 2.5 years, this year, I lost my sister February and lost my dad in April. And I'm keeping my mom, and she has dementia. It has been rough. And I'm pastoring at another church, and of course my husband. And this is the only time that I've been able to get away this whole year. I work full-time, pastor full-time, been a caregiver for my sister, my dad, and of course my uncle last year. He died in August. This has been great for me. It's actually been away from me. I haven't been on vacation this year because of all of that. And I've had to go back to work because there's nobody to fill in, and continue to keep even through the morning. I'm looking to take some time off and actually to retire. I've been there in collections for 37 years. And I've asked God for the open door to actually show me when it was time. And the open door don't look like you think it's supposed to look like, but I am retiring in order to give up something and trust God in it, because he showed me the open door. What would you suggest for my husband and I? My dad, before he died, always would say, you and your husband need to take some time. You know, we need to continue to culture our relationship in marriage. We're both in ministry, pastoring at different churches, a unique, different situation than most. What would you suggest?
That you sit down together and you plan out when is the best time before you get to a place where you're forced to do it. Sit down as soon as you leave here and say, okay, how can we do this? What does it look like where I can truly and honestly get away? Plan it out and do it. You don't want to be forced to do it, because when you're forced to do it, you can't enjoy it because you're spending time trying to recover. And you've had a lot going on. I don't think people understand that when we do funerals at churches, and I'm not even talking about family members, but good members who die, we carry that burden too. So we're carrying the burdens of our family, and we're carrying the burdens of good members who have passed away. And we have to take time to recover from that. No one may have passed away in your family, but you may have lost 3 or 4 members in your church, and you carry that burden. And we need to stop acting like it doesn't bother us, you know, that's their family. Just watching a family grieve is a burden, which is why we have to take time to recover. So my suggestion to you is that you and your husband sit down and say, we got these 2 different churches, when can we take it at the same time and enjoy ourselves, educate our congregation, our leadership, why we need to do this, and do it. Do not wait. Yeah.
Yes, so thank you for this workshop. This has been very enlightening. So I'm not a pastor, but I think you've raised a good approach when you said that you had to educate the congregation. After the educational piece, how do you begin to have that conversation with maybe the trustee ministry, right? So that you can sit down, kind of iron out expectations as you work through, you know, whether the time, you know, what we're looking like as far as conversation, you know, things of that nature. Like, how do you begin to have that conversation with that trustee ministry?
Honestly, I don't have that conversation. My chair of deacons and my vice chair has that conversation with them, because there are things they can say that I don't want to say, but need to be said. And so I talk to them about what I think I need, I believe I need, what would the range be, and they go to them on my behalf. So you develop a great relationship with, and sometimes it may not, sometimes unfortunately, it may not be the chair of your deacon board, unfortunately. But it may be some deacons that are on there who respect you, your leadership, that trust you and you trust them, that you talk to, and allow them to go to the chair and talk to the chair, or allow them to say, hey, we're going to do this because pastor needs it and deserves it. But I would not go to the trustees myself. Yeah. All right. Well, I hope you've enjoyed and been blessed by this workshop. Thank you so much. The Lord be with you.
The information that you shared with us today, have you put any